the wrong camera on, and I don't even have the mic in front of me. I'm so unprepared today, you guys. Not unprepared on the facts, but everything is not quite running as planned this morning. We've had a really chaotic week here in my household, and so things are a little chaotic on Friday. I can't wait for this week to be over. I'll just be honest. Okay. Good morning. It's Resistance Live. It is the 19th of January, 2024. And this week has been pretty crazy. We have a lot to talk about this morning, including Trump's new Supreme Court brief on the issue of the Colorado ballot initiative and some stuff in Fulton County and a lot more. But first things first, I'm coming to you as always from occupied Tongva land. Today for our visually challenged folks, I am wearing a cream colored top that has some shirring at the sleeve, and I am wearing my thick hoops. My skin is pink, my eyes are green, my hair is dirty blonde. I'm in my office in front of my plant in my chair. My pronouns are she, her. Thank you for being here. Okay, so last night, as was required by the schedule, Trump filed his opposition to, his opening brief in the Supreme Court matter involving the Colorado ballot initiative. And it's a very interesting brief on a number of fronts. I'm not going to go through all the details of it because, as is the case in most Supreme Court briefs, it's very thick on the law. But I am going to point out one thing that's really interesting from a strategic standpoint, which is that he has essentially dropped the argument that was in his petition for certiorari that he did not participate in an insurrection. There's a lot of speculation this morning about why he did that, particularly because the Colorado trial court ruled that he had participated in an insurrection. And from a strategic standpoint, one of the things that I think has got to be going on here is that his attorneys have realized that if they open the Pandora's box of allowing the Supreme Court to rule on whether or not he participated in an insurrection on the facts, that potentially has an implication for his criminal cases. Because if they rule he participated in an insurrection, that ruling can then be admitted into any court in which he's being tried for criminal charges related to it. Now, I have to say that doesn't mean the Supreme Court's not going to have to rule on it, because in order for them to reach a conclusion on whether or not Section 3 of the 14th Amendment should keep him off the ballot, they have to determine that he's an insurrectionist. So it's a little bit of like slicing it a little thin, to try to get to where he's going. But the arguments that he is making are in essence an argument that he was merely engaged in political speech. And that in and of itself is a real stretch as well, because the First Amendment does not allow you to participate in insurrection. So it's a very fine line that is being, as I said, sliced here. And I'm not sure it's going to work. I will say that this brief is a lot more bland than the briefs that have ordinarily been filed on his behalf. I don't think that's going to make much of a difference, though, when it comes to how serious this issue is. Now, I have to remind everybody that as with any other case, his lawyers are now having to face the way in which the arguments that they are making intersect. And he does have a slightly different team than usual, as from what I'm told anyway, working on the Supreme Court challenges. So who knows? But I have to tell you that, we're in a situation where there are multiple cases pending right now that are historic, never been adjudicated issues in the history of the United States of America related to Donald Trump. And so it's all brand new. And I think, we've got an opposition brief that has to be filed within the next week. Then we have a reply brief, and the oral argument is on February 8th. So we're, now 19 days away from that oral argument. It's going to be a really interesting opposition by the Colorado Secretary of State and others as to what their response is to this. So I will just say that it could have been worse. I mean, that's kind of my opinion about this brief, which is saying something when it's Donald Trump, right? The one thing that is very bizarre, though, about the argument, which is not bland and to which everybody's attention should be drawn, and is the reason for like the thumbnail today, is that there is one statement in there that that's very weird. I mean, it's just like, that's the only way to put it, is it's very weird, which is that it says that chaos and bedlam will be unleashed if Trump is not on the ballot. Now, I have to point this out. That's a very strange thing to say in a Supreme Court brief. The Supreme Court rules on the application of the law in the United States of America. It's the ultimate arbiter of how the law should be applied. And the idea that chaos and bedlam would erupt if he's not on the ballot is not anything that's like a legitimate argument in front of the Supreme Court, right? Plus, it's kind of an implied threat, which we know he's really good at, okay? But I'm just going to say this. I don't think the Supreme Court has ever hesitated to rule on anything because it might cause chaos and bedlam, right? I mean, it's not like they were thinking about that in the Dobbs decision. It's not like they were thinking about that in Drew Scott. It's not like Dred Scott. It's not like they were thinking about that in Brown versus Board of Education or Roe versus Wade or Chevron for that matter. They weren't thinking about whether or not chaos and bedlam was going to be unleashed by one of their rulings. They're actually not even supposed to consider that. So, it's a very curious thing. And it's one line out of an entire brief, but it was enough to make me go like, what are you doing? Like, and not because, not even so much because I think it's true, right? I don't think there's going to be chaos and bedlam if he's not on the ballot. I mean, I have to remind you all of something, by the way, because like, you know how we memory hole things, like especially in the Trump era, because there's so much chaos and constant breaking news and trauma, and we're all in a relationship with a malignant narcissist, whether we like it or not. Does everybody remember what happened the day after the election was called for Joe Biden? Like there were celebrations in the streets, even though we were still in the deep thick of COVID. Like huge, massive turnouts in front of the White House with like drums and cheering and music and flags while Trump was still sitting in it, right? So the idea that Trump not being on the ballot is going to cause some kind of chaos and bedlam, even after January 6th, is sort of nuts, right? I mean, people were like overjoyed that Joe Biden had won the election. So, you know, again, I have to remind everybody, I know there's a segment of our community, and rightly so, that gets kind of like really afraid whenever things like this are signaled. And, you know, January 6th left a mark on all of us. Like, let's not deny it. But on the other hand, the idea that the Supreme Court ruling that he can't be on the Colorado ballot and, you know, is an insurrectionist is not going to cause chaos and bedlam in the streets of America. It might cause additional lone wolf terrorism, but what else is new? I mean, I hate to be that cynical about it, but I mean, it's happening all the time. It's not like there's going to be like, you know, less death threats or more death threats. There's death threats happening against Congress people like every day right now. We talked about this yesterday, how the Capitol Police are investigating death threats against Jerry Nadler and Eric Swalwell. You know, I mean, like from Roger Stone. This is not new. All right. So the idea somehow that there's going to be an uproar, mass protests in the streets if Trump's not allowed on the ballot, I don't think so. I mean, I'm going to remind you all, it's only like 20%. That's the guesstimate right now of the American population that's in the Trump cult, the vast majority of whom are like really old. So again, here we are. You know, I mean, I will have to see. But anyway, we've got a very interesting 3 weeks coming up in front of the Supreme Court. The vast majority of this brief was very bland, and the arguments that he made were really kind of curious and weird. And the chaos and bedlam thing, you know, like I'm not going to get up in arms about it. Although I do think that I just think it's weird. I mean, granted, I'm a lawyer. I mean, I know you all may perceive it a different way, but like I read it and I was like, well, that's the weirdest thing you would ever say to the Supreme Court in an argument about whether or not a constitutional provision should be applied to the facts of a case. They don't care. So in any event, that's the deal. That's the deal on that. All right. Now I got to talk about Fonny Willis because I have to remind folks in this community, particularly our Patreon subscribers, you know, by the way, you want to ask questions in advance of the broadcast, please become a paid subscriber over at patreon.com/resistance live. You can ask me questions for 2 hours before every broadcast and I will answer them. This morning on the Patreon feed, there were a number of our subscribers, thank you all for being there, who asked questions about Fonny Willis and investigation and this hearing that Judge McAfee has set. And, you know, I have to say one thing initially before I just deal with the facts of it. Don't get distracted. Okay. Don't get distracted by this. You know, first of all, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation has affirmatively stated, like there's mainstream media press coverage of this. They have made a statement that they are not investigating Fonny Willis. All right. The second thing that people need to be aware of is that there was news that broke yesterday that the wife of Special Prosecutor Wade is the root of this. Okay. And one thing that's very strange is the question of how the allegation that Fonny Willis was having an affair with Special Prosecutor Wade. How did that information get to one of Trump's co-defendants? Nobody knows. I have some suspicions. You know, like somebody who's in the middle of a really hotly contested divorce might do some crazy things. That's been known to happen before. Okay. But I will tell you that it's a very weird chain of evidence. The third thing I'm going to mention here is that apparently, according to the divorce papers, the cause of this divorce was the wife having an ongoing and extended affair with Special Prosecutor Wade's best friend. Okay. So projection, perhaps. All right. But the Georgia Bureau of Investigation is not investigating Fonny Willis. I just also have to point out all three of the special prosecutors in the Trump case are being paid the same amount. So any allegation that there was special favor given to Special Prosecutor Wade as a result of some alleged unproven, unsworn allegation that she was having an affair with him by an ex-wife who was having an affair with the special prosecutor's best friend, all of this should be taken with an enormous grain of salt. All right. And we'll know what we know when we know it. Now, Judge McAfee, because judges have to do the right thing, and they got to dot their I's and cross their T's so they don't get overturned on appeal, has set a hearing that is going to require Fonny Willis to respond to this allegation. Okay, I'm just going to point out she's already responded to this allegation twice. She responded to it in an event that was held at her church, where she described him as a friend. She described the other prosecutors as a friend. She pointed out that he is the only Black man among the three special prosecutors, and the fact that he is being targeted by this should raise some eyebrows. And in essence, stated, without having to say it, because why should she have to say it, that he's a friend. Okay? Now, if it's different, we're going to learn about that. But I'm also just going to point out to you what I've said to everyone else here before. All right? White male attorneys have affairs all the time with their staff, with their secretaries, with their associates, with junior people in their offices. It's a relentless problem in the legal profession. It happened in every single law firm that I ever worked in, okay? Of which there were 5. Managing partner, secretary, managing partner, junior associate, managing partner, or just partner, and mid-level attorney. All the time. Okay. And it doesn't mean there's some massive corruption. It doesn't mean some special favor has been granted. If it did occur, is it a lapse in judgment? Perhaps. But I'm going to tell you all, this allegation right now is made in an unsworn pleading by a criminal defendant who is really reaching for straws for an argument that there is somehow some corruption in the prosecution of Donald Trump and his lackeys. And it doesn't have any bearing whatsoever. I know I said this a few days ago, but I'm going to repeat it here again. It has no bearing whatsoever on whether Trump and his lackeys tried to overthrow the government, the 2020 election results, whether they interfered in Georgia, whether they had a nationwide conspiracy for fraudulent electors. It has no bearing on any of it. So, I have my mornings where I go to the Patreon feed and I'm like, why are there 6 questions about this? Because honestly, it's a distraction. And if you're focused on whether or not Fonny Willis had an affair, you're missing the big picture, which is exactly what this kind of allegation is designed to do. Okay. It's designed to be a shiny object. It's designed to distract from the actual horrific criminal conduct that's at issue in this case. So don't get distracted. And, the judge is going to dot the I's, cross the T's. There's going to be a response. We're going to see what it is. I'm going to tell you right now, that it has literally no bearing on Trump's prosecution. None. Okay? That's it. So I really want folks to just see the big picture. Again, I said it a couple of days ago, and I'm going to say it again. Grasp the 30,000-foot view of what's happening. A co-defendant with Donald Trump has made an unsworn allegation against the prosecutor of corruption, essentially, with no proof. And that apparently any information related to it is apparently coming from the wife in a very hotly contested divorce herself. Her hands are not clean. We do not know what her motivations are going to be in relation to it. And we'll deal with what the facts are. But it's not going to change the fact that Trump and his people committed mass crimes in the 2020 election. All right. That's the big picture. Okay. And I just have to say the other thing here. One of the things that really bothers me about the nature of these kind of allegations is that people get interested in them because they're salacious. All right. I don't give a good goddamn about Fonny Willis's sex life. I don't care. I don't want the down low. I don't need the information. What I care about is whether or not our democracy is safe. Okay. People do all sorts of crazy things in their own bedrooms. It makes no difference to me. I don't care. And I frankly don't think anybody else should either. And, yes, I mean, Solveig's making a very good point here as well. Fonny Willis's filing in relation to all of this says that a subpoena is being sought in an attempt to harass and damage Fonny Willis's professional reputation. True. Literally true. Would this even be coming up if it were not coming from a Trump co-defendant, let alone the guy who is like the dirt digger for Trump's campaign? Because that's who it is who's made the allegation. I think people should move past it. Just really move past it. Okay. All right. We are waiting still for the immunity ruling from the DC Circuit. Somebody asked me this morning, why is it taking so long? Okay. So I have to say again, it's not taking so long. Okay. I know I said I thought it was coming last Friday. Lots of my compatriots in legal commentary have said they think it's coming today. I have to remind everyone that this particular ruling is going straight to the Supreme Court. It is also a historic ruling. This issue has never been ruled upon in the history of the United States. The DC Circuit wants to get it right. All right. And I know everybody's like, but what about Judge Chutkan's trial date? More on that in a minute. But literally, if they get it wrong, we lose. It'll go to the Supreme Court and they'll reverse. So you have to temper your, expectations here and your impatience with the need to get it right. Okay. And it's not going to be much longer. Don't get me wrong. A week and a half, we're a week and a half from oral argument. You know how long it usually takes to get a decision out of the DC Circuit? Just trust me, I know, because I argued in front of it. 6 months. 6 months. So let's just sit tight. They know the urgency. They had it on a rapid briefing schedule. They know what's at stake, right? It's coming. And it'll come when they've got it right. All right. There's nothing to worry about with this. Nothing to worry about. Okay. Let's talk about Judge Chutkan, because yesterday she did issue a ruling on the issue of Trump's attorneys arguing that Jack Smith should be held in contempt. You will remember this was another crazy brief they filed about 10 days ago. They claimed that Jack Smith's team should be held in contempt because they continued to file papers in preparation for trial, notwithstanding the fact that there was a stay on everything except the administrative stuff that Judge Chutkan can manage until the DC Circuit appeal is resolved. Well, of course, she didn't hold them in contempt. I told you this was going to happen, but, I guess, maybe it's not that obvious. She didn't hold them in contempt. They didn't do anything wrong. Like I said, this is the time. They didn't do anything wrong. Okay. The one thing she did say is, look, if you're going to file any more substantive briefs right now, please seek leave of court first. Okay. Again, totally reasonable. It's literally write a letter to Chambers and ask if it's okay for you to file this brief. So that was that decision. Now, there is some signaling in this that her trial date may not stick. And I told you all that would not surprise me. Right now, the March 4th trial date is still on, but we're waiting for this ruling from the DC Circuit. Then there's going to be an attempt to appeal it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can reject the appeal out of hand and not grant certiorari, in which case we are right back in front of Judge Chutkan. Okay. If they take up the appeal, it's going to be on as tight a schedule as the current Colorado 14th Amendment ballot initiative. All right. And again, I got to remind you all, start to finish on that is 30 days. So I've said this before, but I'm going to repeat myself again, because I know everybody gets whacked out and worried about it. I know you guys are not lawyers, and I'm not meaning to be pejorative about it. I want you to be calm about this process. All right. But literally on the current timetable, the likelihood that we're going to have a trial this spring in Judge Chutkan's courtroom is 90%. Okay. At this stage of the game, the latest that trial is going to start because of this Supreme Court's term is June. All right. And I don't think they're going to grant him this. Got to remind you all, if they grant presidential immunity to Donald Trump, Joe Biden could execute Donald Trump the next day and never be prosecuted for it. Okay. So it's not possible. I just want everybody to understand that it's not possible that Donald Trump is going to get absolute presidential immunity. So I'm not worried. And I don't think anybody else should be either. I think the dominoes are set up. And the only question is, when does somebody flick the first one? All right. Okay. Very good news today. Oh, wait, before I get to the very good news, let's talk about Peter Navarro. The DOJ filed a brief this morning asking for 6 months of jail time for Peter Navarro for evading that congressional subpoena. You will remember that he was found guilty for criminal contempt of Congress. They're asking for 6 months of jail time. I'm just going to tell you, I think that's wise. I think it's important. I think he should get it. I think this thing of the Trump universe being able to evade congressional subpoenas, including people like Jim Jordan, has to stop. Like, this particular threat is really necessary. Now, I know Steve Bannon's out there walking around after being found guilty because he's on appeal, and you all know how I feel about that. And I don't think it's right. But again, contempt of Congress is not considered like a major felony. But that said, I think Peter Navarro should do jail time. And I think that it's about time that somebody did for violating a congressional subpoena. So we'll have to see what happens next. Okay. But that is the request that has been made this morning. All right. Other legal news this morning. Yesterday, there was a decision by the Maine Supreme Court that essentially remanded the issue of whether or not the Maine Secretary of State's determination that Trump shouldn't be on the ballot, remanded it until there was a ruling from the Supreme Court on the Colorado ballot initiative issue. This morning, the Maine Secretary of State has appealed that decision. So, Maine's got to get their own ballots done, and they're on a different timetable from Colorado because every state is responsible for administering their own elections. So the Maine case is going up on appeal now too. We're going to have to see what happens with that. But there's continuing movement on this issue. I got to remind you all, it's like 19 states, I think, now have a pending case that has either not been ruled on or has been ruled on partially on the issue of whether or not Trump can be on the ballot. So things continue to tick along at a pace there. Okay, good news this morning. Joe Biden has done a really good thing, which is that he has waived another $5 billion in student loan debt this morning for 74,000 Americans. I got to remind you all that all of this is being done through currently existing regulation by the Department of Education. And this one is really good because this tranche of loan forgiveness goes to people who have been in public service positions for 10 years. Okay. So that means teachers. It means people who have been working as public defenders. It means people who have been working in legal services departments. It's been people who have been working for Doctors Without Borders. Okay. People who have dedicated their lives to serving the public who are carrying student loan debt. This is huge. It's really huge. And again, I got to remind you all, when you hear from others this disinformation and propaganda that Biden hasn't lived up to his promises on student loan debt, I got to remind you, the facts are that he tried to forgive an enormous amount of it. The Republicans challenged it. It went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said he couldn't do it. So he's finding other ways to do it through existing regs. And he continues, this is the second announcement this week of a massive amount of student loan forgiveness. So promises kept, people, right? Like, make sure you are loud about this because it makes an impact in contradiction to the disinformation that's out there. Okay. That's it for today. It's a lot. In 23 minutes and 40 seconds. I want to remind you all that Progressive Coffee Hour is coming this Sunday for our Patreon subscribers. You can join us at 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 11:30 a.m. Eastern, East Coast time. I said that twice. If you are a Patreon subscriber, you can head on over there to patreon.com/resistance live to get in on that. But I'm not expecting that this day is over yet. Again, you all know how I feel about Fridays, but I think we're going to have some significant legal breaking news today, and I don't know what it's going to be. But I will just tell you that even last Friday, when I was wrong about the DC circuit, there was still an enormous amount of legal news that day because we were getting ready for E. Jean Carroll and other things were coming. And we were ahead of the Iowa caucus. So it's not going to be a slow day today. I'm just telling you all that. So stay tuned. If there's a need for an emergency broadcast, I will pop back on here. In the interim, I do want to remind everybody, please start mobilizing where you live. Find out who is running for your local elections. Find out who is running for your state elections. Figure out where you're going to dedicate time. Because the other thing I just have to remind you all of is that while all this stuff is happening with Trump, the fascists are pushing forward as fast as they can on state law. And it's really scary and really bad. So, I'm going to tell you all, by the way, 2 women, there's a situation this morning where 2 women died in Florida because they were denied emergency abortion care. And the Biden administration has apparently intervened in that. So there's just a lot going on right now at the state level. And it's really important that if you are frustrated, if you are upset, if you are scared, you take action and get involved where you live. So please spend some time this weekend figuring out where you can next volunteer a few hours of your time in furtherance of candidates or causes that you care about. And Don't forget as well that there's going to be a need in the coming months for volunteers directly for the Biden campaign. So, you can always go check out joebiden.com if you want to get in on that. All right. I will talk to all of you on Sunday if you're Patreon subscribers. I will be here earlier if need be, but otherwise have a great weekend, everybody. And I will see you back here on Monday, regular time. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.